When I refused to pay for my cousin's wedding and my family disowned me. Everyone watched them completely fall apart, and then it started with a message from my mother that simply read, Saturday, 2 p.m. sharp, family discussion, don't skip. No context, no warmth, just that cryptic order sitting in my inbox like a summons from a courtroom. And the moment I saw it, I knew something was brewing, something dramatic and emotionally rigged. Because the only time anyone in my family uses the word family, like it means something sacred, is when they're about to corner you with guilt and leave you stripped of your dignity. I didn't reply. I didn't ask questions. I just showed up because that's what I always did, even when I knew I was walking into a trap. My parents live in Providence in a house that still smells like the same carpet cleaner they've used since I was a kid. It's the place where I broke my ankle on the porch steps and got yelled at for being reckless, while my legs swelled like a balloon. As I walked in, I felt that same heavy pressure in my chest, the one that comes with knowing your role in the family isn't based on who you are, but on what you provide. I'm 31, the only one of my siblings who has a full-time job with a consistent paycheck and health insurance, which in my family apparently makes me some sort of walking ATM with a duty to fund everyone else's bad decisions. The moment I stepped through the door, I knew I should have turned around and faked a flat tire. The atmosphere in the living room was off. People speaking in hushed tones, side eyes exchanged like bad poker tells, and my Uncle Ellis sitting stiff in the corner tapping his phone like he was waiting for a stock market crash. I walked to the kitchen to grab something to drink, trying to play it cool, and my mom gave me this look that felt like a silent accusation. Don't be difficult today. I didn't say a word, just took a glass of lukewarm lemonade and braced myself. Then Melody stood up like she was about to present her startup to a board of investors. She'd always been the golden child, the one who somehow never had to work a real job, but always had new clothes, new trips, and a doting audience of adults praising her ambition. At 28, she was engaged to Zach, a guy who looked like he was designed in a lab for maximum smugness and minimum utility. She cleared her throat, thanked everyone for being open-hearted, and launched into a whole monologue about how her wedding was going to be more than an event. It was going to be a symbol of the family's unity, a legacy that future generations would point to as the gold standard. Then Aunt Vanessa, her mom, pulled out a manila folder thicker than my lease agreement and started going through tabs like she was prepping for a courtroom trial. Here's the breakdown, she said, holding up a laminated spreadsheet with multiple color-coded categories: venue, food, photography, fireworks. Yes, actual fireworks. A horse-drawn carriage, and a freaking influencer-grade videography package. The total, $65,000. I choked on my lemonade. Vanessa didn't blink. She said the family had come together to support this dream, and now it was time for everyone, with resources, to step up. That was the moment she turned to me and said, Jordan, we know you're not struggling like the rest. This is your moment to give a real gift. I sat there blinking like I'd been slapped without being touched. I asked, just to clarify, how much of this real gift they were expecting. She said it so casually, 15,000. A meaningful contribution. The room went dead silent. My dad turned his eyes to the window like he was suddenly fascinated by the neighbor's fence. My mom started scrolling on her phone like she hadn't just invited me here to get financially mugged by my own blood. Zach was doing nothing, just scrolling through his phone, not even pretending to act interested. And Melody stood there smiling like this was the kind of thing loving families just do. Hand over thousands of dollars with a pat on the back and a slice of cake. I let out this little laugh. Not sarcastic, not mean, just the kind that escapes when your brain short circuits. Is this real? I asked. You want me to just give 15 grand like it's a pizza delivery? That was when Vanessa pounced. She said I owed it to the family, that everyone had sacrificed for me, that it was time I gave back. My mother chimed in to say I'd forgotten all the little ways people helped me, like when Uncle Ellis replaced my bike tire 12 years ago, or when I stayed at Aunt Susan's for a week while recovering from the flu. I didn't even bother bringing up how I paid for 3 Thanksgivings in a row or fixed the family Wi-Fi every time it went out, or how I covered last-minute costs for my younger brother's graduation party, because no one else stepped up. I tried explaining that I have rent, I have loans, and no, I'm not drowning, but I also don't have piles of cash lying around for someone else's fairy tale. Vanessa cut me off, eyes sharp, voice cold, and said I was selfish human garbage. My mother said she didn't know what kind of man I'd become. My dad stayed mute, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought it might snap. Melody didn't say a word, just pulled out her phone and started typing, probably something passive-aggressive for her social feed. I stood up, didn't say goodbye, didn't slam the door, just left. Thought maybe they'd cool off. They didn't. The next morning, I woke up to a phone vibrating like it was trying to escape the nightstand. Group chat messages, missed calls, and a wall of texts from family members I hadn't spoken to in years. My uncle said I was a disgrace. My aunt sent me a guilt-soaked paragraph about how I was undermining Melody's joy and ripping the heart out of this family. I ignored all of it, muted the chat, and tried to move on. But then my phone buzzed with a message from Nate, my friend from college, asking if everything was okay. Apparently, my mother had started calling my friends, saying I was having a breakdown and lashing out at the family. She told people I'd screamed at dinner, flipped the table, and stormed out. For the record, I didn't raise my voice once. I just said no. That week, I drove by my parents' house after picking up groceries and saw boxes on the lawn. My old yearbooks, childhood drawings, a few dusty trophies, even the busted-up laptop I used in community college. I parked, walked up, tried my key in the door. It didn't work. I rang the bell. My dad opened the door, stared at me like I was a stranger, then silently pointed to the boxes and shut the door in my face. I stood there for a minute, not sure whether to laugh or kick something. I took what I could fit into my car and drove away. Checked my email when I got home. There it was, a mass message sent to extended family and random family friends. Subject line, Jordan's betrayal. It said I was a parasite, that I had disrespected the entire family, and that I was no longer to be trusted. I screenshotted it, sent it to Nate so he'd know what kind of circus this had become, and poured myself a drink. The peace didn't last. The real madness hadn't even started. After the email blast went out, I figured maybe things would burn out on their own, that eventually someone in the family would step back and realize how completely unhinged the whole situation had become. I underestimated just how committed these people were to pretending this was about something noble like family honor, instead of the real truth, that they were furious someone finally said no. Within 3 days, the silence went from loud to strategic. Nobody in the group chat said a word, but behind the scenes, they were working overtime to tear my name apart. First, my friend Lucas texts me asking if I'm all right, saying my mom had reached out to him claiming I was in crisis, that I was isolating myself and cutting everyone off. I hadn't spoken to Lucas in 2 months, so the idea that she hunted him down just to plant seeds made my skin crawl. When I asked what else she said, he hesitated, then admitted she hinted I was dealing with some kind of mental breakdown, maybe job loss, maybe depression, something vague and awful. He didn't believe it fully, but said I should know what's being said. That's when I realized this wasn't just a tantrum. They were building a narrative, casting me as unstable, volatile, and cruel so they could write me off in public without ever addressing what they'd done. I tried to ignore it. Went to work, hit the gym, avoided family-heavy parts of town. Then a few days later, I came home to a note on my apartment door from the landlord. It was polite but awkward. Said my mother had called the office asking about noise complaints and whether I'd been acting erratic around the building. The landlord said nothing stood out, but figured I should be aware. I felt the blood drain from my face. They weren't just icing me out. They were actively trying to make me look dangerous. I texted my mom asking what she thought she was doing. She left me on read. Not long after, Aunt Vanessa showed up outside my building like some kind of sitcom villain, standing by the sidewalk in a coat, like she'd been waiting there an hour. I came back from grabbing takeout and saw her pacing in front of the steps, arms folded, eyes locked on the door like she could summon me with fury alone. As soon as I approached, she started in on me. How I was ripping the family apart, how I had embarrassed her daughter, how I was throwing everything away over a little money. I told her this wasn't the place. She moved closer. I backed away. She reached out and grabbed my arm, not in a violent way, but with this grip that screamed ownership, and I pulled free, told her to back off. She slapped my arm, muttered something about how I was a disgrace, then stormed off like she hadn't just tried to start a full meltdown on the sidewalk. I was done playing nice. I started compiling everything: texts, emails, even payment records. Not because I wanted revenge exactly, but because I was tired of being branded as this selfish villain when I'd spent years quietly covering bills, organizing events, fixing tech issues, and showing up to every birthday, holiday, or crisis with gas in my tank and money in my pocket. I wasn't just the reliable cousin. I was the damn infrastructure, and they had no idea how much they depended on me until I stepped away. Then Melody called. Her number popped up, and I just stared at it, wondering if it was a mistake or if she finally decided to speak like a human being. I picked up. She didn't even greet me, just launched into this voice full of fury and disbelief, telling me I'd ruined her wedding, that her guest list was thinning, that vendors were asking questions, and she didn't understand why I was doing this. I asked her what exactly I was supposed to be doing, handing over 15 grand like it was owed just because the family decided she was special? I reminded her of the time I covered half the deposit for a cousin's baby shower, fixed her dad's busted laptop, and booked the hall for Uncle Ellis's retirement party. I asked when, exactly, those things became debts owed rather than generosity freely given. She hung up. The next day, Vanessa started blowing up my phone with text walls long enough to require scrolling. She accused me of manipulating the family, of lying about my financial state, of gloating in the suffering of others. I blocked her. A few hours later, my mom tried to FaceTime me. I declined. She texted, "You're not our son anymore. You chose pride over loyalty." I asked her if she even remembered why this all started. She replied, "You brought this on yourself." More days passed, and the silence shifted into something worse: selective erasure. I started noticing I was removed from planning chats for birthdays and cookouts. Mutual friends unfollowed me, then reached out privately with awkward messages asking, "Did something happen between you and your parents?" I responded simply, "Yeah, they asked me for $15,000. I said no. That was apparently a betrayal. One old friend said they didn't know what to think. I told them, "That's fine. Think whatever you need. Just don't expect me to stay quiet forever." And then came the tipping point. I was at the grocery store picking up coffee and oatmeal, just trying to pretend I wasn't living inside some emotionally radioactive zone, when I heard someone call my name. I turned and saw Brent, a guy I went to high school with, barely talked to since. He smiled like we were catching up at a reunion and said, "Hey man, heard you got kicked out. What's that about?" I felt this weird twist in my gut. Not anger exactly, but that dizzy feeling when you realize people you barely remember are now getting updates on your life from people who hate you. I just shrugged and said, "Family drama." He laughed and patted my shoulder like I'd told him a joke. People love disaster when it's not theirs. That night, I drove past my old house again, just to see if maybe the storm had passed, if maybe someone had started to come to their senses. The lights were on, cars in the driveway. It looked peaceful, like nothing had happened. I walked to the porch, rang the bell. My mom opened the door, stared at me like I was a stranger asking for donations, and didn't say a word. I asked her if we could talk. She said, "You chose your path." I asked, "When did I become the enemy?" Her eyes narrowed. She said, "When you put yourself above this family." Then she closed the door, slowly, like she wanted me to know it wasn't a slam, it was final. From that point forward, it was clear they weren't just upset. They were rewriting the story. They were scrubbing me out. I watched Melody post photo after photo about resilience and letting go of toxic people with captions like "Some betrayals hit harder than others." Dozens of likes. Comments from people I recognized, cousins I used to babysit, aunts who used to hug me every holiday. They were all in. The campaign was working. I thought about just walking away, letting them spiral, cutting ties quietly. But then my landlord emailed me again. Another call from my mom, this time claiming I might be hoarding weapons or living erratically. I laughed out loud when I read it, then felt cold. This wasn't gossip anymore. It was slander. It was escalation. That's when I decided If they wanted to drag my name through the mud, fine. But I wasn't going to let them do it unchallenged. I wasn't going to let them destroy me and walk away clean. I had facts. I had proof. And more than anything else, I had time. I didn't act right away because I wanted them to keep talking, keep believing I was going to stay quiet and take the hits while they made me out to be the villain. I let the silence sit like bait, let the stories spin themselves deeper until I had everything I needed lined up, every message, every bank transfer, every old receipt from the years I spent cleaning up after the very people now calling me ungrateful. When I finally moved, it wasn't loud. It was surgical. First, I stopped paying into the lake house account, the one in Vermont that everyone loved to use for birthdays, retreats, and those healing weekends Melody always posted about like she was some kind of spiritual guru. I'd been quietly splitting the taxes with my dad for years because no one else would, and they knew it. They assumed I'd just keep covering it because that's what I always did. I texted my dad and told him I wasn't paying another cent. No reply, no fight, just left me on read. Probably thought I was bluffing. Then I pulled up every payment record I had. For years, I'd handled logistics for family events. The time I fronted the deposit for Uncle Ellis's anniversary party, the barbecue where the caterer canceled and I drove halfway across town to pick up replacements. Even the holiday dinners where I'd picked up supplies and gifts because no one else brought anything but excuses. I built a document. Clean, color-coded, time-stamped, with amounts, dates, screenshots of bank transfers, Venmo requests, group chat confirmations. No insults, no name-calling, just cold, clear proof that I had never been the problem. I sent it to a few cousins directly, ones who hadn't said anything but were clearly watching it all happen. Caleb replied, said he'd always figured I was pulling more weight than anyone realized but didn't know it was this bad. A couple others replied with vague, wow messages, clearly trying to stay neutral. I didn't blame them. Nobody wants to pick a side when the family politics are this twisted. Then I wrote my own version of the infamous family email. I kept it calm, formal, like I was notifying a company about breach of contract. I told them that, effective immediately, I would no longer contribute to any shared property, event, or expense. I attached the financial record for clarity and added that any remaining costs for the wedding or related planning would not fall to me under any circumstances. I CC'd the entire family, including distant relatives I hadn't seen since high school reunions, just like they'd done to me. I didn't offer a defense. I let the facts speak. The reaction hit faster than I expected. Within hours, my phone lit up like a switchboard. Aunt Vanessa called 7 times in a row. My mom left 3 voicemails, each one more dramatic than the last. How I was tearing the family apart, how I'd embarrassed her, how this wasn't who she raised. My dad finally called. His tone was flat, exhausted, like he'd just woken up in the middle of a disaster and didn't know where to point the blame. "You're making it worse," he said. I told him, "You let it get this bad. I'm just turning on the lights." That weekend, they came to my door again. Vanessa had Melody with her this time, and she was crying before I even opened it. I didn't let them inside. Vanessa tried to push through anyway, so I blocked the frame and warned her I would record everything if she didn't back off. She shoved my shoulder and called me a disgrace, said I was destroying everything. I didn't flinch, just repeated, calmly, that they needed to leave or I'd involve someone who wouldn't be as polite. They stormed off, Melody sobbing like she was the victim of a tragedy she helped create. I checked the vendor contracts next. I had helped coordinate a few bookings back when I still believed we were all pitching in. My name was still on the photographer and the venue agreement as point of contact. I emailed both and explained the situation, politely but firmly stating I was no longer affiliated with the event, that any further communication should go to Vanessa or Melody directly, and that I accepted no financial responsibility for unpaid balances. The photographer responded first. Without my payment, the booking wasn't confirmed. The venue followed, same thing. No final payment, no secured date. I forwarded both replies to the family chat and closed the app. The fallout was instant. Melody sent me over 30 texts in the span of 2 hours, ranging from begging me to fix it to accusing me of sabotage. Vanessa followed up with the same exhausted accusations about legacy, loyalty, and disgrace. My mom texted, "You're breaking my heart." My dad called again, but said nothing useful, just that I was making us look bad. I told him, "You did that when you threw my things in the driveway." Caleb texted me again, "Dude, what did you do?" Everyone's freaking out. I sent him a screenshot of the vendor email chain and said, "Nothing, they didn't start." He didn't reply after that, which told me he was probably trying to distance himself from the explosion. Then Melody posted one of those vague, black and white quotes on her story. "When people show you who they are, believe them." I almost laughed. My landlord messaged me again, said he'd received another call from my mom, this time about concerns for community safety. He asked if I wanted him to block her number. I said yes. He said done. The whole dynamic changed after that. People who were once aggressive started scrambling. I got texts from cousins I hadn't heard from since college asking if I was okay, some saying they were sorry for not speaking up. A few admitted they'd thought the original story was weird but didn't want to get involved. I didn't care anymore. I told them, "You chose your silence. I'm choosing mine." The final thing I did that week was send a message to my father. Just one line. "Don't ever use my name or my money for anything family-related again." He replied 5 minutes later, "I hope you're happy." I didn't respond. They wanted to make me the bad guy. They wanted a scapegoat they could bleed and then bury. What they got instead was a mirror held up to their mess. No screaming, no threats, just receipts. I thought that after the vendor fallout and the family email drop, the worst of it would pass, that maybe, finally, people would realize they'd picked the wrong guy to villainize. I assumed they'd retreat, regroup, maybe even rethink how far they pushed this thing. Instead, it got louder and uglier, and so far past delusional that I actually started wondering if I'd underestimated just how deep this mess really went. The lake house was the first visible casualty. The tax notice came in faster than I expected, a fat envelope marked urgent that got mailed to all co-owners, which of course included my dad and 3 relatives who only ever used the place but never once paid toward its upkeep. Caleb texted me as soon as it hit their inboxes. "Just FYI," he wrote, "Uncle Derek's losing his mind." I asked what happened, and he said the weekend trip they'd planned was being scrapped because the power company issued a shut-off notice. Apparently, no one had realized I also handled the electricity until the automatic payments stopped. That was my favorite part, when the freeloaders started panicking not because they cared about the situation, but because they lost their luxury retreat spot. Vanessa called my dad, screaming so loudly that a neighbor apparently overheard through the walls. Then she posted on Facebook about being betrayed by those closest to you. The comments were filled with people saying things like "stay strong" and "family is everything." I didn't say a word. Then I got another email from the venue manager, this time saying they'd officially canceled the wedding reservation due to non-payment and lack of response from Melody or Vanessa. I already knew it was coming, but seeing it in writing made it real. I forwarded it to the family chat with no caption, just the message. The fallout hit harder than the last one. Melody sent me a paragraph at 2 in the morning saying I had ruined her life. Vanessa followed up with a classic guilt trip, saying I was breaking apart generations of legacy. My mom left me a voicemail that sounded like a sermon. "We worked for decades to build this family. And you've lit it on fire." At that point, cousins who had been silent were suddenly split into camps. Some started asking for clarification, like they hadn't been eating popcorn during the entire group chat implosion. Others tried to stay neutral, which in this case meant nothing at all. One cousin, Layla, straight up demanded to see the receipts for everything the family had paid into the lake house. When nobody could provide anything solid, because my dad and Vanessa had always kept things vague, she sent a new thread CCing nearly everyone, asking why one person was being blamed when no one else knew where the money even went. From there, it spiraled. People started demanding breakdowns for past expenses, arguing over who had contributed what, digging up old events to accuse each other of freeloading or bailing at the last second. A few people posted Instagram stories about healing from family betrayal, clearly aimed at me but vague enough to avoid confrontation. Melody went quiet for a day, then posted a selfie with the caption, "We rise above the chaos." Her face was streaked with makeup like she'd been crying, but the background was clearly a staged setup with a filter that turned everything golden. Meanwhile, the vendors started backing out. Caleb messaged me again, saying the florist pulled their service and the baker canceled the cake delivery. I asked if he was still involved in the wedding, and he said, "Honestly, I don't know anymore. I think I'm just watching the crash at this point." The group chat became a ghost town, just Vanessa posting updates nobody responded to, and the occasional spam from distant relatives who hadn't even read the thread. The silence was almost worse than the arguments because it meant everyone was watching but pretending not to see anything. That same week, my friend Nate told me my mom had called him again, this time asking if he'd noticed any changes in my behavior. He told her to stop calling. He also told me to consider going full no contact. I told him I was already halfway there. My dad texted once, asking if I was happy now that everything had collapsed. I responded, "No, but at least I'm not the one who built this disaster." He never replied. That weekend, I started clearing out the last of my stuff from their house, and when I showed up, my mom was sitting on the porch like she'd been waiting for me. She didn't speak, just stared, arms crossed, like I was trespassing on sacred ground. I packed up the remaining boxes, old books, a spare jacket, some photo albums they clearly didn't care about anymore, and when I turned to leave, she stood and brushed past me like I didn't exist. I went home, opened my laptop, and saw a new email from Melody. This time it wasn't long, just one sentence. "I hope you realize what you've done." I didn't answer. I didn't even save it. I deleted it, poured a drink, and sat on my balcony watching cars go by while the sun dipped under the rooftops. For the first time in months, I felt something like quiet. A few days later, the group chat flared back to life with a final update: wedding postponed indefinitely. The message was short, posted by Vanessa, and followed by a series of reactions from various family members. Melody posted a quote image to her story later that day: "Sometimes the people you trust the most are the ones who sink the ship." I nearly dropped my phone laughing. The self-awareness was non-existent. Caleb texted me again, saying now there was a rumor going around that I had embezzled family funds. I asked him who started that one. He said he didn't know, but someone had floated the idea that I'd been controlling the lake house finances for years and siphoning money off the top. I told him that if they wanted a forensic audit, I had spreadsheets going back a decade. He just said, "They're flailing, man. You had a nerve." Another cousin who had been silent all this time suddenly reached out asking if I was planning to send an apology. I told him, "No, I'm planning to move on with my life." Then came the final blow: an email from my mother, sent to everyone. Subject: formal severance. The language read like a business termination, effective immediately. "Jordan is no longer a recognized member of this family. We wish him clarity and healing on his chosen path." She copied the entire family tree. I read it once, deleted it, blocked the email. My dad tried to call again. I let it ring out. Vanessa sent me a handwritten letter, yes, actual pen on paper, saying I'd destroyed everything they tried to preserve. I put it in the back of a drawer and forgot it. I didn't feel powerful. I didn't feel victorious. Mostly, I just felt tired. But in that exhaustion, I also felt free. They'd spent so long holding loyalty over my head like a weapon that they never imagined what would happen if I just let it go. And now, the fallout was theirs to deal with. I wasn't cleaning up anything. A month after the last message from my mom, things got quieter than I expected. Not the fake silence that comes before another explosion. This was different. The kind that creeps in when people finally realize they can't control the outcome anymore. When the target they spent months attacking doesn't flinch or answer or beg for forgiveness. I stopped checking the group chat. I stopped waiting for someone to apologize. I just started living. For once, I wasn't looking over my shoulder wondering when someone would guilt trip me over dinner or try to trap me with a quick favor. My weekends were mine again. My thoughts didn't belong to their drama. It felt strange at first, freedom disguised as discomfort, but eventually it felt like breathing fresh air after years in a smoke-filled room. Caleb and I kept in touch. He told me that the wedding vendors weren't the only ones pulling out. A few of Melody's bridesmaids dropped, citing scheduling conflicts they didn't bother to explain. The photographer posted a cryptic message on social media about being lied to by clients, and people in the family started quietly unfollowing Melody altogether. I didn't react. I didn't need to. The story was unraveling on its own, piece by piece, without me lifting a finger. Then, one night, I got a message from Nate. Check Melody's page. I hesitated, then looked. She'd announced a new project, a GoFundMe titled Healing After Betrayal. The goal? 25 grand for therapy, emotional restoration, and a potential rebooking for a smaller wedding with positive energy. I read it twice to make sure it wasn't satire. It wasn't. The comments were a mix of support, confusion, and outright mockery. One person wrote, "Didn't your family already try to charge people to attend?" Another said, "Maybe canceling was the healing." I closed the page and never looked at it again. Weeks passed. I focused on work. I started reconnecting with old friends who hadn't been dragged into the war zone. I finally signed up for the gym membership I'd been putting off for 2 years. I sat on my balcony most evenings, phone flipped face down, just watching the sky change. And one afternoon, for no reason at all, I smiled without hesitation. They wanted to teach me a lesson for saying no. What they taught me instead was how much better life is when you stop living under the weight of obligation. I didn't win by fighting back. I won by walking away and letting the storm burn itself out. There's peace in distance, and knowing that survival doesn't require forgiveness, only resolve. I didn't burn the bridge. I just stopped crossing it.